Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Hello and welcome to session 2 of day 1 at ScotSecure. Thank you for joining us in stream 3, where I'm delighted to say we've got 2 fantastic presentations coming up. For the benefit of the audience, you can maximise the window by double-clicking the screen or using the maximise icon in the control panel. Throughout both sessions, you can ask questions to our speakers by using the built-in chat facility visible on the screen, or by messaging me, Ben Whiting, directly through the platform facility. You can also chat with our speakers at their respective booths throughout today and tomorrow. Our first speaker of this session is John Hope, Senior Engineer at Sophos, with his presentation addressing the human challenge of cybersecurity. John, over to you.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks, Ben. Let me introduce myself first of all. I'm John Hope. I'm a Senior Technology Evangelist at Sophos. In short, I've been at Sophos for 10 years now, and my current role is really to talk about all things that we have at Sophos that are great in terms of technology and how they can address some of the real world challenges of cybersecurity. I'm going to be taking a lot of statistics from the both the 2020 and the 2021 Sophos threat reports, which you can download from our booth, so you can find more information about some of the background behind some of the statistics that I'm going to present to you. And what we're going to do is, first of all, is look at the cross-section of people that we interviewed as part of this process. And we contacted 5,000 respondents all across the world, a fairly high proportion from the UK. And what we found is that organisations that responded varied in size quite dramatically. So we had a roughly 50-50 split between what we would classify as small to medium businesses and then the larger enterprises. And we had a fairly good cross-section of sectors as well. So the idea of this survey was really to get a good cross-section of how the end user community is feeling about cybersecurity right across the spectrum. And the first bits of information that dropped out of that report were really good news. One of the first and most significant challenges, I'm sure you're all aware, in IT security is all around patching, and the mantra of patch early, patch often seems to be sinking in. And we saw that a surprising percentage of people are actually now on top of patches on a regular basis, and the regimen associated with getting patches sorted out seems to be certainly improving. And you'll see that the UK is actually slightly ahead of the curve. So overall, 77% of patches were applied within a week, and the UK actually sort of beat that with an average of 82%. So that's certainly some positive news to start with. And of course, we all know that patching is important because these little loopholes that exist in software and operating systems are exactly the kind of hooks that the cyber criminals are looking to exploit in order to get into an organization and carry out their nefarious deeds, whatever they might be. And it's important that we look at the time that we spend in what I would classify as being preventative maintenance. So it's an interesting sort of split here with the respondents about how much time those skilled individuals were spending between prevention, detection and response. And you can see in the UK that a little higher percentage than maybe some other countries is spent around the prevention side of things. So that's certainly really, really positive news, because we know that by being prepared as users of IT equipment, it leaves us in a much better place when it comes to protection. And that rings true when we start to look at the quantity of organizations that were hit by ransomware. And you can see on the left-hand side, these are the organizations that were victims of ransomware, which was just a little over half. You'll see that those organizations were spending about 43% of time on prevention, whereas you look at the organizations that weren't hit by ransomware, and they were spending 48% of their time on prevention. So it shows that by putting a little bit of extra time into the preventative side of things, it does lead ultimately to better levels of protection. And if you think that you can't prepare yourself successfully for ransomware, then I'm just going to call out this particular article from our Naked Security team that talked about the telltale signs that you are about to become a victim of something like ransomware. So often there are precursory telltales, and it's worth spending the time looking across your organization for maybe where some of those telltales might exist. The good news is as well that some of that time in terms of preventative actions was spent around IT managers keeping themselves up to date. So this is spending time across the industry, looking at articles, skilling themselves up in lots of different areas. And again, that obviously leads to better levels of preparedness as well. So, spending that time and educating yourself and educating the teams around you is all really positive news. However, I'm afraid to say we should probably leave the champagne on ice, because when we look deeper into that report, you'll find that there are unfortunately some slightly worrying and slightly challenging statistics. And I would certainly go as far as to say the war is far from won. The battle against the cyber criminals is certainly far from over. And one of the most indicative points around that is the fact that 51% of the respondents in our survey became the victim of some kind of cybersecurity attack. And really what this is telling us is that organizations of all sizes are constantly becoming victims. And it's interesting that 51% of the respondents also wanted to minimize the chances of cybersecurity and wanted to make that a priority for the forthcoming year. And as I mentioned, a larger number of organizations hit by ransomware, and actually, interestingly, hit by ransomware typically more than once. So the average number of times that people that were hit by ransomware were hit was actually 3 times. The worst in the survey was actually 11 times over. So it just goes to show that once you get hit, then often you become repeat victims. And unfortunately, cyber criminals often share intelligence about the people that have paid up on ransoms and that kind of thing. And as a result, they end up on what is unfortunately called a sucker list. And that means that they're constantly getting hit over and over again. And also, of course, we've got a new battleground. We've got the new battleground of public cloud. So we saw that a very worrying 70% of the organizations experienced some kind of public cloud security incident during the same period of time. So a lot of challenges are certainly there. And you might be wondering, well, why is this news so bad? Why are the statistics so bad? And there's some real hard truths, and particularly in the 2020 ransomware report, there's some real hard truths around why the situation is so bad. The first is, as I already mentioned, that 51% of organizations were hit by some flavor of ransomware at least once during the 12-month survey period. And what is really, really challenging and really concerning is that 9 out of 10 of them actually had endpoint protection that was installed, up to date and properly configured. And yet, even though those organizations had some kind of endpoint protection installed, 73% of those attacks actually ended up being successful from the cyber criminals' point of view. In other words, that 73% of those attacks ultimately ended up with some form of data encryption occurring. And then also really concerning is that 20% of organizations were actually unable to pinpoint the source of the attack. So they knew they were hit from somewhere, but they couldn't tell you where that came from. And that's really worrying from so many different points of view, because of course, first and foremost, if you don't know where the attack came from in the first instance, and you don't know the precursory steps and how that attack got in, you can't learn anything from that attack. And it means that you're not really in a better place to be prepared and protected from the next kind of attack. And it also means as well, when it comes to answering hard questions from regulatory bodies like the ICO, for example, it must be pretty embarrassing not to be able to provide a lot of information around that kind of attack. So let's start by looking at that 9 out of 10 and wondering why that statistic is so bad. Why did 90% of people have some kind of protection and yet still got hit? And it's really to do with the way that traditional types of antivirus work. So I suspect most of the audience will know that traditionally antivirus has been built around signatures, and basically organizations like Sophos and our peers in the cybersecurity industry, we make it our business to get hold of as much malware as we possibly can so that we can create a signature for that malware, distribute that out to our users so that those devices can then recognize what is basically a piece of malware, what is basically a virus. And that approach has worked very, very well for a high number of years. But unfortunately, we now live in a world where we see so many cyber attacks occurring. So on average in our labs, we see 450,000 new malware samples every single day. And what that ultimately means is that our users, our customers, are as equally likely, if not more likely, to come across a new flavor of malware than our labs. And it means that, of course, if you don't have a signature, if our labs haven't seen it, and you're relying solely on signatures, then unfortunately that protection is not going to work, and that malware potentially is going to walk straight through into the organization. And that's not a problem that's unique to Sophos. That's just the fundamentals of how signature-based antivirus works. So that statistic of 450,000 is the reason why the industry has been talking now for a couple of years about next generation defense, which in short is empowering and enabling the endpoint to be able to work for itself and figure out what is likely to be malware without necessarily having that prior knowledge. So obviously different vendors have different approaches to next gen, but very, very quickly at Sophos, we use a combination of machine learning. So we use the intelligence of an artificial engine to recognize what is likely to be malware based on the traits and characteristics, and based on what we've already seen in the world of malware, and learning from that knowledge base that we have. We also have a mechanism that covers the exploit side of things. So despite the fact there are so many different types of malware, there are only a very limited number of ways that a cyber criminal can exploit software loopholes and that kind of thing. And InterceptX, which is our brand name for our next generation protection, sits across all of those different attack vectors to help detect them. And then we also have a very unique anti-ransomware defense, which is basically relying on detecting the underlying cryptography, regardless of how that malware actually got into the organization, regardless of what type of ransomware it actually is. Just looking at the pure fact that it's encrypting a bunch of data is recognized as being bad, and we can prevent that and also roll back data that's encrypted. So that's kind of, you're wondering why are we talking about next generation protection, and that is sort of one of the key reasons behind it. Okay, so moving back to our survey, what we're going to look at next is the third-party supplier route of getting malware into an organization. So we've seen a high number of attacks where the supply chain has been exploited, and what we found in our survey is, despite the fact that organizations of all different sizes exist in this survey, that most of them are now opening up their network in some way, shape or form to third-party suppliers. So the average number is 3, and a surprisingly 21%, which is a surprisingly high number, have more than 5 connections into their network. And what that does is ultimately increase the exposure, because you're now not only inviting your own legitimate traffic in and out, but you're also then relying on organizations externally to connect in, and also relying on their security regimen as well. So you'll see that the UK is probably a little behind the stakes actually in some regards in terms of the numbers of third-party suppliers. So 18% of our respondents directly in the UK here had 5 or more suppliers externally connecting in, which is, as I say, a little bit down the curve, but that might not be a bad thing, because like I said, it is inviting in risk. And of the organizations that weren't hit by ransomware, then it was a lower number, 13%, that were actually allowing 5 or more connections in. But organizations that were hit by ransomware, then that number skyrocketed up to 29%. So you can see that by introducing those external parties into the equation, then it is ultimately introducing risk. And interestingly, that 9% of our respondents say that when they were hit by an attack, that did actually come in via a third-party supplier. So categorically, that's proof that cybercriminals are exploiting those loopholes and using third parties as a route into the organization. And of course, all that complexity means that we need to start relying on human beings to start looking at the threat hunting side of things. So this is where we're going to talk a bit more about the human element of cybersecurity. So just under half of the organizations already incorporated some kind of human-led threat hunting into their cybersecurity strategy. And then another 48% planned to introduce some kind of human-led threat hunting within the next 12 months. So what that ultimately means is, if everything goes according to plan within the 12 months, then organizations will pretty much universally be having some kind of human-led threat hunting as part of their security strategy. And human-led threat hunting is very, very important because it goes beyond the realms of traditional technology, and it allows human beings to apply their logic and their foresight to traffic that's actually being seen. And you can see that the UK is a little bit behind, I suppose, against some countries in terms of who's already deploying human-led threat hunting. But you'll see that, that certainly the plans to implement that are strong. So the UK should be ahead of the curve ultimately when it comes to human-led threat hunting by the time the 12 months has run out. Now, how do you execute human-led threat hunting, you might be wondering? Well, there are really fundamentally 2 different approaches when it comes to implementing human beings more in your cybersecurity approach. The first is on the left-hand side, which is basically to do it yourself. So lots of cybersecurity vendors like Sophos are introducing technologies like EDR or endpoint detection and response. And this is basically going beyond the realms of traditional protection to also enable a whole bunch of threat hunting capabilities and searching capabilities, which empower your cybersecurity teams to be able to look for themselves across the estate and start to look at their environment. Or alternatively, on the right hand side here, the many vendors like Sophos are also introducing managed threat response services as well. So this is effectively outsourcing the human-led threat hunting capabilities and then getting a third party in to actually look across the estate and proactively monitor the estate for malicious activity. So let's first look at the option on the left here. Let's look at the way that EDR can work in an organization. So obviously each vendor is different, but what I can tell you a little bit about is how Sophos do things. So our EDR solution allows you to carry out lots of very precise searches. You know, even little simple things like what devices have I got on my network, what's running which particular version of an operating system. Then starting to look for more interesting in-depth analysis, like, you know, what processes are making network connections on odd ports, what processes have recently modified system files, registry keys, you know, who's using PowerShell, how are they using PowerShell, do we see services that are potentially malicious being obfuscated and using, you know, friendly names like services.exe, which looks benign on the face of it, but is basically the bad guys masquerading as legitimate system processes. So you can carry out all of these different kind of actions, and then you can also choose to remediate using our EDR solution by opening up the command line for devices wherever they happen to be. So obviously we now live in a world where people are working remotely, and EDR becomes more than just a tool for searching, but actually allows you to carry out remediation actions remotely as well. So it can be very, very powerful as part of your IT strategy. And it all sounds great, but of course one of the biggest problems is EDR is just a tool, and you need somebody who's skilled in order to be able to implement and action those searches and interpret the data that's coming out of those tools. So organizations almost universally found it very, very challenging to actually find decent skills and retain those skills when it came to delivering IT security. There's a huge number of jobs, for example, being advertised all the time for cybersecurity analysts. So it's very difficult to implement this kind of approach. 54% of people said it was a significant challenge, and a little over a quarter found it to be their most significant challenge. So if you're struggling to find and hire decent IT security skills, then you're certainly not on your own. And it does lead to a mind shift if you do actually become the victim of ransomware. So in the blue column here, we've got people that were hit by ransomware, and you'll see that they recognize that finding decent cybersecurity skills is actually a more significant challenge. So you'll see, for example, that a high number that were hit by ransomware then later on went on to say that the single biggest challenge they had was finding these skills. So, you know, it does prove the point that you really do need to get these skills implemented. And we are starting to see a significant shift in the way that organizations are choosing to deliver their cybersecurity strategy. So you'll see that there is quite a big shift towards this concept of either collaborative in-house and external outsourcing, or actually just shifting wholesale to an outsourcing approach. So the market is kind of moving and gravitating towards this concept of a managed threat response service. And what we offer, and a lot of other vendors do very similar things, is we offer a security operations center that is out there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in our case, looking across a customer's estate and acting on suspicious activity, investigating it, not just detections, but also, you know, suspicious activity, things that look out of character, and often what's called leadless threat hunting at Sophos, which is basically just looking in and seeing what we can find without any necessary cause or reason. Important to note as well, by the way, that moving down the route of managed threat response services like this doesn't necessarily mean replacing your IT team. So at Sophos, we often collaborate with in-house IT teams. You know, for example, we can use our managed threat response service to highlight things that we think need action. We can provide prescriptive guidance and then deliver it to the in-house IT teams so that they can execute on it. Or alternatively, we can operate in a collaborative approach. For example, if your security team don't work at weekends, they don't work in the evenings, then we can have a mixed mode response where we'll actually only intervene out of hours and otherwise leave the in-house security team to actually action the results. So it's good to know that this service is flexible, and we can really work with how your in-house IT security operations center actually works. Of course, talking about the in-house security teams, then obviously one of the priorities, whether you go down the route of managed services or whether you go down the route of having your own in-house threat hunting capabilities, is having time to be able to carry out these tasks. And I'm sure every one of you out there will sort of join me in agreeing that the amount of time it takes to manage IT security is too much, and there are too many other competing tasks, like the simple things of keeping the lights on, for example, take up so much time that anything that you can do to improve efficiency is definitely good. And this is where I want to introduce very quickly the concept of cybersecurity as a system. So what we offer is using multiple different Sophos products across the estate, like our endpoint and our firewall, to work together, because what we believe that delivers is a much more efficient IT security system. It leads to fewer security incidents, which means that IT have more time, and they can then use that time to get better prepared, to skill up, to understand the industry and the threats at large, so that they then experience fewer security incidents, and it becomes this positive feedback loop that really works to help bolster IT security. And even simple little things like the automation of detecting that an endpoint has some kind of problem and then automatically isolating it, which is very much part of the key soft security strategy, means that when an incident does occur, you're just dealing with one rogue endpoint, rather than if you think back to the dark days of things like NotPetya and WannaCry, then instead of just having one device to remediate, you could end up with a whole network which is down. So it's hugely beneficial to be able to isolate those machines and then to bring that efficiency bonus back into the equation. And one of the things that I would suggest as well is using that time to also help train your staff members, your team, because human beings, I'm afraid, ultimately they're a big part of the cybersecurity challenge, because unfortunately human beings, sometimes they let you down. When users click on phishing attacks and interact with malware in the wrong way, then that's where things start to go wrong. Interestingly, 33% of data theft incidents typically involve some kind of phishing as part of the overall attack chain. So what you can do is empower your users to recognize what's likely to be some kind of phishing attack. So I'm going to show you these three brands that I'm sure you'll all recognize, and you might be wondering what all of those three brands have in common. And the simple thing is that these are the most spoofed brands when it comes to phishing attacks, because cyber criminals know that these are trusted brands and that people will sort of look at messages that seem to come from those organizations and just intrinsically trust them. And sometimes we look at users and we think that they're our worst enemy, because these are the people that click on this stuff and invite the malware into the organization. But I want to challenge you guys to think differently about your user base and instead consider them to be your greatest ally. Because if you use training tools like Sophos Phish Threat, for example, to help users recognize what is malicious content and not interact with it in the wrong way, what you're doing is you're training them to improve their security readiness, and you can see those improvements over time. And it's a natural benefit when it comes to improving your overall cyber security strategy. So definitely time well spent training up your users and then using humans to combat the cybersecurity challenge and almost add them into your cybersecurity team. Okay, so we've been through a lot there, and what I want to do with the next couple of moments is just spend a little bit of time summing up on all the things that we've just heard and we've just talked about. So we're going to start out by some of the positive things that we found in these surveys. We found that the day-to-day security process is improving, that people and IT managers are better at staying up to date and staying aware of industry trends. We found that, unfortunately, the challenges haven't gone away. We found that ransomware is still prevalent, 51% of organizations hit by it. We found that there are new challenges around cloud security as a new attack vector. We found out about challenges involving third-party suppliers coming into organizations, and having that trusted link often leads to security challenges. One thing we didn't talk about in here, which I'll emphasize as well, is the proliferation of different operating systems and different platforms. So it's no longer longer just Windows. You've got people using Macs, you've got people using mobile devices. Of course, these days you've got people working from home as well, maybe on personal devices, all of which increase the cybersecurity challenge. Now, we also found that human-led threat hunting is a great way of helping to keep on top of your cybersecurity estate to make sure you don't have malicious actors already present in your environment. And, you know, that's particularly relevant right now if you look at things like the Hafnium attack and the fact that, you know, there may be malicious actors still at large in your organization. But human-led threat hunting brings its own challenges in because, you know, having those skills in-house, retaining them, finding them in the first place is all really, really challenging. And then we looked at the fact that maybe one of the solutions is to improve efficiency and power yourself with good tools like our EDR solution, maybe freeing up IT time by consolidating your IT security into a single vendor approach, or alternatively that maybe the route of outsourcing to some kind of managed service might just be a better way of bolstering the cybersecurity estate. And what we also found in terms of the victims is that the people who were hit by ransomware are the organizations, unsurprisingly, that had the greatest level of exposure, that maybe lacked some of the focus around cybersecurity regimens and processes, that maybe they didn't have an appropriate set of skills, and that they weren't responding quickly enough to incidents. So this is all really telling us that the more prepared we can be and the more on top of these kind of security challenges we are, then the better place we are to be in a positive place when it comes to these kind of attacks, which unfortunately will inevitably happen. It's just a question of when, but being prepared is definitely key. So those are sort of the key summary findings. What I'm also going to do is just highlight a couple of these reports that I said I've referenced throughout this session. So looking at the 2021 threat report, which is a fairly recent publication looking at how cybersecurity might develop during the next 12 months, looking at the state of ransomware 2020, which is a retrospective look at how the security estate looked during 2020, and this is where a lot of those statistics about who was hit and how and why came from, and then also highlighting the cybersecurity evolved the business impacts around cybersecurity as a system. So looking at the consolidation of IT security and how that can help both your budget and also your ability to respond to incidents. All of these publications are available on our stand. So you're welcome to pop by and either have a chat with me, have a chat with my colleagues, and you can download these documents as well. So I hope that was a useful session. I have literally got just a couple of moments. If anybody does have any questions that you would like to ask, then please feel free to ask.
Thank you so much for that, John. Yes, if anyone wants to ask John a question, please use the chat facility built in. For some of you, you may need to minimize the window slightly to see that chat function. We've got one question that's come in so far, just asking how firms can combat cybersecurity issues caused by homeworking vulnerabilities.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that's a great question, and there's a lot of challenges associated with that. One thing, first and foremost, is using some kind of cybersecurity system that recognizes home workers and can connect to them. So moving away from the traditional on-premise managed security, using something like Sophos Central or other vendors' equivalents of a web-based management portal that can see devices wherever they happen to be. That's of course assuming that they're corporate issued devices. Now, if you're allowing users to use their own personal devices, you've got a whole bunch of challenges there, because obviously you don't necessarily have jurisdiction over what kind of antivirus, or if indeed any antivirus, those devices are running. One little perk that we do have for Sophos customers in the office is that we do offer a free of charge version of Sophos Home for people to roll out onto their own personal devices. But you've got to kind of ask them to do it. You can't force them, because it is ultimately their personal device that's at large. What I would say is try to adopt almost a zero trust approach of saying, well, if my user's connecting in, I don't trust anything on their device except the things that I absolutely have to enable in order to get them to carry out their job functions.
Absolutely. And I think you're so right. I mean, my background was working in IT recruitment for 5 years, and some of the points you raised there, certainly with regards to the skilled shortage, I mean, it's still an ongoing crisis. You know, again, this week there's been further reports published about the Scottish government in particular looking to generate, you know, obviously a lot more interest from particularly younger individuals. I think what I often find when I'm working in recruitment for cyber roles in particular is that the routes into cyber roles were always fairly challenging. It seemed to be that there was a lot of the larger education vendors and support organisations offering that route, whereas particularly your SME, your mid-markets, it seemed to be that it was often one-man band or heavy reliance on the IT manager. And then as you see, the training side of things in particular is massive. And I think we hear all the time about firms putting cybersecurity spend down on the list of their priorities. How have you kind of seen that change over the last year, John? Have you seen much of a difference in terms of firms focusing on cyber from a spend perspective?
I would like to say yes, but if I wind the clock back to a pre-COVID era, then we actually did see the spend on cybersecurity starting to go up, which is fantastic. And then unfortunately, obviously, coronavirus kicked in, and everybody found their backs against the wall financially. And what we did see there is a massive budget drop off. Cybersecurity, I liken to insurance, and I apologize to anybody who's in the insurance industry, but nobody wants to buy insurance. It's one of those things that you just have to do. And I think you know, we're still in that category of a necessary evil that, you know, as soon as you have any kind of IT equipment and have a web presence and all that sort of stuff, then you need to have security. And I think what's absolutely key is just getting the most out of that spend. And like I said, you know, having cybersecurity that's all managed from one place, that all works together as a system is by far and away the most efficient way to maximize every pound that you're spending in cybersecurity.
Absolutely. Well, John, thank you so much for the presentation. And again, for the benefit of our audience, you can speak with John and the Sophos team at their booth throughout the course of today and tomorrow. John's presentation will be on demand post-event on Friday and will be live on our YouTube channel in the coming days as well. For now, John, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the session, the rest of the event.
Thanks, John. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for sticking with us. I am delighted to say that we have a long-term friend of Digit and ScotSecure, and a man I'm sure that needs absolutely no introduction, is Jay from the Tech Force. And I'm delighted to say that Jay is going to be joined by Javad Malik from KnowBe4. How are you doing, Jay?
Hey, all good. How was you?
Very, very good. Very, very good indeed.
Thanks for the nice introduction.
Quite all right, quite all right. Again, for the benefit of our audience, if they have any questions throughout this next session, then please use the chat facility. And again, you can chat to guys at the booth post-event. I'll pass over to yourselves just now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a great conference. So welcome to our workshop, Your Organization Through the Eyes of an Attacker. I have my partner in crime here, Javad Malik, a fantastic speaker, works for KnowBe4. So Javad is going to take us through who these hackers are, hackers in the sense of in the bad sense, right? Why they are hacking, why they are attacking, and how they are hacking, and also what information, open source information they're using, they're leveraging to attack your your business, and finally, how you, as a security professional, can leverage the same information and some of the same methods to protect your organization, right? For example, whether it could be, simulating phishing emails, or running some tools to gather the open source intelligence about your business, all of that, Javad will be talking about. And before I give it to Javad, please do visit our stand. We have a fantastic contest running. You have an opportunity to win £100 Amazon gift voucher, and also some of the free tools available from KnowBe4 and whatnot. Right? Okay, Javad, over to you. Please do ask questions.
Cool. Thank you, Jay, for inviting me. Yeah, you said you referred to me as a partner in crime. I'm basically the Robin to Jay's Batman. He said, come along, let's do this, and I can never say no to him. So that's how I've ended up here. But it's always a pleasure. So thank you.
The pun, partner in crime.
So
Right.
let's share my screen, and there we go. Wow, technology at its finest. So yes, your organization through the eyes of an attacker. And bit about me, this is my obligatory vanity slide, but I'm not going to waste your time on talking about me. You can always find out more if you want. Like Jay said, I work for KnowBe4. KnowBe4 is the world's largest integrated security awareness and training platform. We focus heavily on the human side, and the objective is to allow your employees and yourselves to make better security decisions every day. That's kind of like what we stand for and what we do. So the agenda, in Steve Jobs-esque fashion, I like to keep it to 3 bullet points. The agenda is like, why do hackers hack? How do hackers hack? And how we can best defend our organizations. So why do hackers hack? And I suppose there's 2 basic categories we can break it into. There's opportunistic hackers, which these are sort of like your more lower level type criminals. They're out there. They just want to make money. They don't care who they mug, so to speak, on the street. If someone's walking by and they look like they've got £5 in their wallet, they'll go and mug them. And this is kind of like what an opportunistic hacker is. They're the types that will send out phishing emails to tens of thousands of organizations where they've just bought mailing lists and they blast it out to everyone. They'll try to infect ransomware to whichever organization, whether they can pay it or not, or what have you, not care. And then there's the more targeted attackers. And these are like where you get the higher end cyber criminals, or you get nation states involved. And they are specifically after your organization. They might be after something specific in terms of like IP, intellectual property, or they might be after a certain individual, or there's money, or there are many reasons. And some of those reasons are they could be financially motivated, and that's where we've seen a lot of ransomware in previous years. I don't think you can read any cybersecurity article these days without ransomware rearing its ugly head somewhere among them. There's extortion type attempts that go on. So DDoS for extortion is also probably one of the oldest ones that most people are aware of. Other times they just want to steal credit card data or payment data or user data that they can then sell on or resell on to other criminals. There are nation state actors which are really looking for money or some information that will benefit their country, or to sabotage another country's military or civilian infrastructure, destabilize, all that kind of dirty politics. You have corporate espionage, where one competitor wants to take down rivals. There's computer resource theft, so things like they want to use your servers to host either their information or mine bitcoins and that kind of stuff, or they're hacktivists, the ill-guided often groups who are caught up in this cycle of like, hey, if we attack these companies, and that's a morally good act because they support X political party, or they conduct testing on animals, or any other of those reasons. I thought it's important to talk about penetration testers or ethical hackers or these organizations, because hacking is just the act. It's neither legal or illegal, but as Jay alluded to, we're really talking about the illegal type of hacking here. But penetration tester will basically use the same tools, techniques, and methods that, largely speaking, that the criminals will use, except the difference is that they have permission to do so. Normally, traditionally, like you'd have a letter of authority, you engage a company, you'd set the scope, and you'd say, okay, here are systems I want you to test for me and give me assurance that they can't be broken into easily. Nowadays, you also have a lot of bug bounty type scenarios set up. There are third parties that can mediate these for you. So if you have the organization, you can say, well, here are some apps, and I want to know if there are any vulnerabilities. This is the scope. These are the types of vulnerabilities I'm looking for. And then you can say, okay, for every vulnerability that someone provides that actually is one, then we'll pay you, $500, or we'll give you a T-shirt, whatever it may be. But there are tens of thousands of those in operation now. So how do hackers actually go about hacking? And I sat around for a while thinking about this. I thought this is such a vast area, and like we only have a short time to talk about this. And I thought, when you break it down, beyond all the technicalities of how someone actually gets a foothold, how they laterally move, how they escalate privileges, and all that kind of thing that we associate with hacking. The reality is, when you wind it back to a slightly higher level and you think about what are the root causes, or how do these guys actually break into organizations, what's that one root element, then there's actually only a few things that, I call them a fistful of risks, but, play on the fistful of dollars, I suppose. Let's try and be clever. There's probably a dozen or so real attack vectors that account for everything else that happens after that. So when we look at a lot of the complexities of how a malware operates, and all that lateral movement and data filtration and what have you, all of that happens after one of these things happens. So social engineering, or taking advantage of unpacked software or weak credentials or something like that is usually the root cause, the root way by how a lot of these attackers get in. So again, because we know that the criminals and our sort of like ethical testers, they kind of like follow a similar method or a methodology. Typically, it's not always the case, but typically they'll follow a similar methodology. And we can, if we understand that, we can figure out how the attackers are going to attack and but we can follow the same steps, and we can use that in defensive capability. So let's take the assumption that an attacker is after your organization and they want to gain access to some of your servers. And so they think, okay, the best way to do it would be to send a phishing email to someone in IT with admin privileges. And if they click on it, they can then, get access to their account and access to all the servers they have access to. So that's fine. So there are some pre-click activities that they will undertake. So that's kind of like reconnaissance and weaponization. So they'll do reconnaissance in terms of finding out from a distance, without tipping off any alarms or anything. What operating systems are you using? What kind of credentials are you using? So, are you a Google shop or are you a Microsoft shop? So based on that, they will weaponize a phishing email in this example. So if I know that your organization uses Office 365, then I will send maybe an email claiming to be from Microsoft, saying, hey, there's something wrong with your account. Please revalidate here. You click on the link, you go through, and you enter in your credentials and what have you, and therefore I gain your credentials. So that's in my mind, that's what the weaponization looks like. Once that goes through, then we have the upon click sort of phase that occurs. So there's the delivery, there's the exploitation, and there's the installation. That's all happening in the background. And then once that's all done, then you have the post-click activities, which is like a command and control sort of connection is established, so that it beacons back out, say, boss, I'm in the network, and what do you want me to do? And they normally say, okay, now act on these objectives. And that's the typical kind of like a red team or a pen tester would follow that path. And that's pretty much how a criminal, especially one that's more a targeted attacker, that's pretty much how they would follow the method as well. So from a defensive point of view, we can look at this as 3 steps we can take are discover your attack surface, then simulate what those attacks would look like, and then understand the impact of the breach. So if you discover your attack surface and you know, for example, hey, I've got 5 web-facing apps. Okay, that's fine. So now you have 5 apps. Then you can engage a pen testing org and say, come in and test these apps for us and tell us where you find vulnerabilities and what the impact of those vulnerabilities are. Similarly, your users are an attack part of your attack surface. Okay, so what happens if someone sends a phishing email claiming to be from your IT department saying you need to install this new VPN? Will that user click on it and install it or not? And then you need to understand the impact of that happening. In some cases, you might have some other endpoint detection and response controls that negate it. In that case, you don't need to really worry about it too much. But if you have like a remote workforce where people are working from their own machines and what have you, and they can't tell the difference between an email coming from a criminal and an email that legitimately comes from your IT department or HR department, then that's something you need to think about. OSINT or open source intelligence plays a really big part in how a targeted attacker will focus on your organization, and basically that's to use open, readily available information about your organization and the individuals that work there to gather information to make their attack far more effective. So you can consider it a bit like this. If I know your email address, I normally know your full name because it's your name's in the email address. And from that, I can figure out, well, your domain information might be your employer's domain, and maybe there's some online documents or some websites and stuff available from it. With that information, once I have your full name, I can start looking for you on social media. Social media will tell me your work history. It might tell me what groups you're affiliated with. I might even be able to find out what your physical address is. From that, you can see it spirals out. I can gather more information. And then I can, if I'm a bad guy, then I will likely have access to or gain access to breach data. So if you shopped with fluffykittens.com and that got breached, I will look at fluffykittens.com and see if your email address is there. I'll see what your password was there. And because most people end up reusing the same password, I will then try that email and password combination every site I can think of until I can get into it and use that as another place to gain a foothold into your organization. So you can see how very quickly this like spirals out of control and spreads. And it's not just the passwords that they're after. There's all sorts of information that is really interesting. So if I figure out what your friends are, families like, where you like to eat out from, I can then send you text messages or other sort of means of communication to you. Say, hey, I'm Mr. Friendly Pizza. We have a deal now in place. Feed your entire office for $9.99. Click here, and that could be something, or it could allow someone to enter your office premises, or so many other things that can happen. Password attacks are also one of those. It's one of those low-hanging fruit, but it's so commonly exploited by criminals. I thought it's really worth calling it out. And we often see this in the sense that organizations get breached because someone either didn't change a default password on an admin sort of thing, or RDP was there and there was an easily guessable password, or a user reused their password that was in a breach somewhere. So, things like credential stuffing, which is where they will take a previously exposed ID and password and try it against other things, is just grown exponential. Akamai, I saw they had a report out where they said, like, in 18 months, they saw 61 billion with a B credential stuffing attacks. And that's like over what? That's like 3 billion of forget it, my maths isn't great. I was going to try to work out how much that is a day, but that 3 billion a day, is it? Maybe, or a month. Ignore me. Put it in the chat comments, actually, if you can figure it out before I get to the end of this presentation. That would be great, and it's also a good indication whether you're paying attention. But we see that attacks against passwords are really, so that's why things like implementing multi-factor authentication, giving users access to a password vault of some sort, so that they can choose unique password and sufficiently long passwords, are all great ways that we can, they seem like simple tips in a way, but they can be extremely effective in really throwing a criminal off their game plan. I also just wanted to bring up like bad email rules, because what we see a lot of times is someone gets if someone gets access to an email account, that is really high value target. You can do so many things. A few months ago, last year in Australia, there was a hedge fund, and the CEO, he got a Zoom invite in his calendar, and he clicked on it, and it didn't connect, and he thought nothing of it. And what that was there was it basically sent his ID and password to a third party. They were able to get into his inbox, and they started then sending emails as the CEO to the finance team saying, hey, send 5 million to this new bank account, and they were sending money out. A few days later, the CEO saw that there was large payments being made, and he was actually able to recall, the banks were able to put a freeze on a lot of it, so they didn't lose all their money. They recovered a lot of it, but it resulted in the investors in the hedge fund losing confidence in the organization, and they actually, one of their biggest investors pulled out their fund, and that caused the hedge fund to collapse. So it is a very real threat. It's something that happens a lot. But the other thing that a lot of companies do, a lot of criminals will do, is once they get into an email, they can set up a bad email rule. So what it does is that it says that if I've got access to your email address, I will say, okay, any emails that are related to Project Thor, then send me a copy. Or I can intercept any of the, if you're getting like two-factor like authentication emails saying, hey, your password's been changed on your bank account. Intercept those emails, delete them, forward them on to me, all that kind of good stuff.
Jawad, sorry to interrupt. You have 3 to 4 minutes to wrap up.
Oh, really? Okay, I'm nearly wrapped up.
Cool.
So you can see like this is typically how an Outlook rule is set up, and it's one of those things. Even if you change your password, it stays in. It gives the criminal persistent access. And on cue, as if we had this planned. Thank you, Jay. Mitigations. I think number one is train your users, make them aware of the threats that are out there, so that they reduce their online footprint and they are more wary of some of the attacks that come in. Number two, protect your credentials, have multi-factor authentication, use password vaults, all that kind of good stuff. Run OSINT to learn what is out there about your organization and get third parties to help you with this. Do pen tests, all that kind of full red teaming. I think it's a great investment. Find out what are your most, this is a bit, I say patching is a bit like saying, hey, eat your vitamins and work out every day. Really simple advice, really hard to implement in practice, but still find the most vulnerable systems and patch them. And finally, I think have reporting processes in place. So this is for if you're a friendly neighborhood hacker, find something. Is there a way they can report that to you without being without having to jump through a lot of hoops and without them afraid that you're going to sue them for why were you looking at our data? And more importantly, I think, or equally, is for your employees. If they see something that's untoward within the organization, or if they receive a phishing email, or if they see a stranger in the office, how can they report that quickly and easily? So have those in place, and you go a long way to protect yourself from some of these kinds of attacks. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time. I'll invite Jay back and see if we've got any time for Q&A.
Yes, Jawad, we have a couple of questions here. The first question, if an organization has been hit with this cyber attack, can you hear me, Jawad?
Yes, I can, yeah.
So what advice would you give, and what would you tell them to avoid next time?
So if an organization is hit by a cyber attack, what advice would be? Yeah. I think one of the first things to do is do a root cause analysis, do a forensic analysis of how that actually occurred. and follow it through. It's like, okay, how did that happen? So that gives you number one of, okay, these are the things we need to fix to prevent something like that happening again. But also look at your incident response processes that you undertook. Like, where were there sort of like bottlenecks? Did you know who to contact? Did you know, like, if it's a disclosable breach? Did you have a PR agency to help you with communications? All these kinds of things. Obviously it's nice to have these in place up front, but post-incident, these actually really come to light as to where any of your bottlenecks were in your processes. So just look to refine those. Okay.
We have another question, Jawad. But before I ask you this question, everybody in the attendees, I will ask you one question, right? You have your tech tools in place. You have your firewalls, IDS, IPS, EDR, and everything else, right? But if an email, a phishing email, gets through your defenses, gets to your end user, how confident are you that your end user doesn't click on it? If you're anything less than 9 on a scale of 1 to 10, come and see us at our stand, right? Jawad, question for you: are the canaries worth it? Canaries, honeypots.
Oh, canaries. So the ones from Think's Canary, those ones, I'm personally a big fan of those. I think just because of the ease of deployment and the fact that they only notify you. So they're the opposite end of having something like a SIM in place. A SIM will be very, it'll collect a lot of data and it'll give you a lot of data to trawl through. The Canary, it will give you very little data, but hopefully that if you've configured it right, it will give you a high quality indicator whenever that happens. So I think on the other side, I think even if you just start with tokens, you spread them around, it can be very, very effective in detecting lateral movement in your organization or even insider threats. So I think it's a great tool, but like any tool, you need to really consider how you're going to deploy it and how you're going to respond when an alert does go off, because there's no point in deploying that and alerts are going off and emails are going into a generic email box and no one knows what to do with it.
Alert fatigue, is it?
Yeah.
Right. We have another brilliant question from Andrew Nunn. What do you think is the balance point between providing a good level of info on sites like LinkedIn so that people know if it's worth interacting with someone, and providing too much and becoming a target? How much information would you provide on social media sites?
Yeah. That's a fantastic question, and I think it's one where I think as a generation we're still trying to figure out. I think when you first saw social media come out, people were oversharing a lot, and now people have started to scale that back. This is where I think having sort of like some experience or some looking at some tactics that marketers use is really useful. It's a bit like, the way I think of it is a bit like a movie trailer. You want to entice people, but you don't want to give away the entire plot. And so that's how I think we should think about how we interact or how we engage on social media or any of these forums that are out there. So without giving away what operating systems we use and how many people are in our team and everything, we can talk in generalities on that public platform.
Yeah, and I will also add, it's not just about digital and online access, right? You can gather so much information from your physical, your photos or whatnot you're posting online about your physical access to the building and how, where the CCTVs are, where the gates are, and an attacker could plan if they wanted a physical access into the building, right? So that's another information we can gather from OSINT, right? Really valuable information. What are the usual tools would you recommend, Jawad?
For OSINT?
For OSINT, yeah.
Or for, yeah. The human brain is, the tools aren't as important, I think, as having a methodology in place where you know what you're looking for and then organizing all the data that you get back. Google's like Google Dorking and everything is still a really powerful way to go about a lot of the stuff.
Brilliant. Jawad, we have one last question, but I will answer this one. We have a question from Banakiran. He's saying, how can we prevent end user getting phishing emails even right filtering system is deployed? Banu, come and speak to me. I will tell you how. Visit our exhibition stand and we will show you how. As I said, how confident are you your end user doesn't click on these phishing emails? If you're anything less than 9 on a scale of 1 to 10, come and visit our exhibition stand. And I would like to thank you everyone for attending this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, guys. Yes, like Jack said, you can speak to them throughout the course of the day. For anyone who doesn't follow the Tech Force on LinkedIn, some great content that gets published frequently. Absolutely fantastic content. And you're giving away prizes at the stand, but you're also giving away the signed Kevin Mitnick book. World famous hacker signed Kevin Mitnick book, The Art of Deception, a signed copy you can get. Yes. So give the Tech Force a follow on LinkedIn as well. Javad, are you giving anything away on LinkedIn?
I can. I'll send you a signed selfie if you want. I mean, like.
Hey, well, that's fine. Let's see, that's why you're the Robin to his Batman. That's just
the digital photos are more popular now. You see this NFT thing? Somebody bought it for $66 million. You can buy my tweets if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, thank you so much, guys. And a reminder for anyone that maybe joined us mid-session, the session will be on demand as of Friday and on our YouTube channel as well. For now, thank you, Jay. Thank you, Javad. And we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.